everyone. Welcome to today's event. My name is Audrey Chang. I am the Director of Operations and Strategy with Data Science Connect. Data Science Connect is one of the largest data science communities in the United States and certainly in the world. And we are so pleased to be hosting another learning session today with Tim Sedlak, our speaker. So today we're going to talk about how to build a knowledge graph in simply 4 clicks, and we're led by the expertise of Tim. So Tim has over 12 years of data management experience. Prior to joining Stardog, he actually worked with Accenture, Deloitte, and other consulting agencies as a PMP certified consultant. He has delivered projects ranging from enterprise knowledge graphs to data warehouses. And he currently works with Stardog to help clients make better and quicker business decisions through the implementation of enterprise knowledge graphs. And very excitingly, I hope you join me in congratulating Tim. He is the recent father of a 3-month-old little boy who's called Henry. So we're eager to meet Henry at some point, and he is going to be part of that Stardog family that we're so fond of. So Tim, if you're ready, I'm going to hand over the reins of this webinar over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everyone. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. As the introduction said, my name is Tim Sedlak. I'm a solutions consultant in Stardog. I see some of you posting your location in the chat. I'm currently sitting in Washington, D.C. The weather today is quite nice, so unfortunately not. I know everyone isn't experiencing that in the country, so people down south hopefully can stay safe. As the title says, we're going to talk today about how you can build a knowledge graph in 4 clicks, but we're going to cover a few things first. So to begin, we're going to touch on the problems that keep insights trapped deep in and across enterprise data. We're going to talk about typical data wrangling processes and challenges, and how a knowledge graph can take you from the columns of your data warehouses and your data lakes to the concepts in a knowledge graph. We're going to provide a real life example and use case in the life sciences space. Then we'll do not a hands-on demo, but a demo, how you can build your first knowledge graph in only 4 clicks. And then we'll end with Q&A. So we have a quick little quote here on the screen, but the main point is organizations often find it difficult to be data-driven because they're struggling with their existing legacy data management systems. The insights that they're trying to find often remain trapped in the hard shell of data silos that sit across multiple applications, systems, tables, and rows, which take endless number of clicks to break through. So while that siloed data has been consolidated, it's far from being unified and understood in the context of a business need. There's no single common vocabulary used to describe data across the enterprise, and therefore lacks the necessary meaning. Excuse me. Data wrangling continues to hinder feature engineering and data science productivity with data both inside and outside of the lakehouse. I know this kind of from a firsthand experience. I was a ETL developer in a past life and led a data quality team. So, I understand how data scientists and other people spend, almost 75% of their time just trying to wrangle their data. And then finally, in many instances, the historical knowledge or the specialized skills required to work with the data is often lost, when you're dealing with entire supply chain or kind of larger data ecosystems. So the whole goal of a knowledge graph is to make data easy to use, easy to explore, and really want to drive insights across the enterprise. So that brings us to Stardog. What is Stardog? Well, from my perspective, Stardog is a flexible, reusable semantic data layer that helps customers, data scientists, enterprises, whoever it may be, to unify data and metadata, even from data catalogs, business vocabularies, and disparate data sources. The goal is to deliver context-enriched information and capabilities to infer new connections across the data and uncover insights. So I mentioned earlier this column to concepts thing. So what does that mean exactly? Well, typically in a large enterprise, we start with data silos. This is where critical data is physically stored, often in different places, including external third-party sources, spreadsheets, in people's minds, across different data structures, whether that's tables, databases, code, PDFs, etc. Well, to get from columns to concepts, traditionally you have to ingest that data, co-locate it. But with Stardog, we can unify data from across these sources, offering the flexibility to either ETL or virtualized data, which often offers cost-efficient scalability. Once we've determined whether that data should be brought into the graph or should be left in a remote data source, we want to enrich that metadata in the knowledge graph by adding real-world context, which brings meaning to those column names. We can then use Stardog's inference engine and inference capabilities to augment that data with new connections. Within this capability, we offer full explainability, which means you can see the logic behind these insights. And then finally, you can use this connected graph of data to run analytics, machine learning, and Power BI reporting, or even build other applications on top of the graph. But really, this connected web of data allows Stardog to power an ecosystem of apps for machine learning, analytics, and other applications. So you've now turned your columns into concepts, and what you can then do is harmonize this data through business meaning. Again, it allows you to connect that data from across your data silos, and you can streamline data exploration and discovery, especially to more data citizens who may not have the special data management, data integration type skills. Now, we talked about columns to concepts once again, but where does this apply? And Stardog is a industry agnostic platform. We've highlighted some of the industry verticals where we've worked in the past, but there are many more that are not mentioned here. So whether that's activating fair data in the healthcare and life sciences space, building a supply chain, a digital twin in manufacturing, an AML or fraud use case in financial services, or a flight planning use case like we'll see in our demo later today. But again, excuse me. So I'm going to dive first a little bit deeper into a life sciences use case. And this is a real world use case of one of our customers. And so this is going to touch on why the Stardog Knowledge Graph is brought into organizations to help them with their challenges around disparate data sources, formats, and other things to drive innovation. So we're going to use a pharmaceutical use case from one of our customers. Boehringer Ingelheim is a pharmaceutical company with a very complex environment, really about as complex as they can get. A little kind of fun fact about me in my previous engagement, as I was introduced, she mentioned I worked at Deloitte. Well, I actually worked for the FDA in the pharmaceutical space. So this use case really hits home for me. But Boehringer Ingelheim and any other pharmaceutical company, they have to consider everything from R&D, clinical development, preclinical trials, all the way through to the commercial and regulatory data that they produce, and more importantly, safety and quality. Ultimately, a lot of this data sits in silos. Some of this data is internal to the organization. Some of this data is sourced externally from organizations like the FDA, clinicaltrials.gov, Medra, SNOMED, just to name a few. So being able to make sense of this data allows researchers to do what they need to do in terms of understanding what targets to identify or validate. Maybe from a clinical perspective, how do you accelerate the execution time for drug discovery? For the commercial standpoint, what is the omni-channel framework and how do you coordinate that across various go-to-market functions? And then again, from where I kind of sat within the FDA, from a regulatory perspective, how do we get better approvals by understanding how all this data connects and relates? You can then take this to the post-market side, trying to understand adverse effects, what compounds or what things trigger adverse effects. But really understanding, the entire supply chain of that data becomes critical in a pharmaceutical use case. Now, again, we talk about this data being siloed. If we this causes a broad challenge across the organization where internal and external data isn't brought together. But if we can do this, then we can empower the critical stakeholders to make better decisions, and allow an organization like Boehringer Ingelheim to function more efficiently in a safer manner, and really create a greater impact in the world. So, kind of in a nutshell, the data landscape is a mess. Data is represented in different ways, different languages. And we're going to try to use a knowledge graph to kind of solve that problem. So how did Stardog help? Well, with Stardog, you can look at this unified data across the organization without having to build large ETL jobs to migrate the data. I mentioned the virtualization capabilities earlier. You can leverage these data sources where they are, particularly if they're already in an existing data lake. So I know data scientists often leverage data lakes like a Databricks to pull their data in and perform their kind of day-to-day work. You can build reusable, composable digitizations of the entire life sciences life cycle, right from R&D to preclinical, all the way to the post-market surveillance that we talked about earlier. But all of this data is going to be represented through a business semantic layer, regardless of where that physical data is coming from, where it's being stored. And this is what allows you to promote more reuse of that data. And then by connecting it, you can share it across various business functions in a seamless way. So defining this data in a semantic layer, instead of columns or tables, you're defining them as molecular components or compounds, studies and trials. How are those studies associated to those trials? What are the regulatory entities? What are the adverse effects? Instead of asking the questions from a table or columns perspective, we're asking the question from the business meaning. And this is really up-leveling the understanding of that data and tying it to that semantic layer, and allows you to perform, more advanced analytics, more machine learning, more things on the R&D side, like drug discovery. And we're starting to really see pharmaceutical companies leveraging the knowledge graphs and transforming how they do business. And that's represented in real change in how quickly they can deliver their drugs to market safely. So kind of in summary, a unified semantic data layer powered by a knowledge graph empowers these users to answer complex questions that were once time-consuming and difficult before. Using metadata on samples, studies, targets, labs, etc., and all this is captured by Stardog. It allows researchers to ask the questions you see here on the screen. Like which set of compounds are creating similar effects, or have we done studies involving genomic analysis before? Now, again, to kind of summarize the key capabilities that you should look for in a knowledge graph. The first is virtualization. This is the capability to connect directly to structured and semi-structured data sources. It prevents you from having to replicate that data into the knowledge graph. It also supports the rapid development and iteration to add new data sources and data sets into the graph. And by querying this data where it lives, you're guaranteed to access the most up-to-date data, and always getting the most current information available. The second is the semantic graph, or the semantic layer. This is where we begin to treat data and relationship as first-class citizens. We can begin to infuse meaning into your data versus the structured first relational thinking. We can link and trace concepts from across your data silos and really ask questions from any perspective. And this flexibility is what gives you the ability to continuously evolve and absorb new requirements when building out your knowledge graph solution. And then kind of third is inferencing. Inferencing is the ability to add new nodes, relationships, and context through semantic reasoning. You can use declarative rules, logical inferencing, and machine learning algorithms to enrich your data. And within the Stardog platform, these inferences appear at query time, which allows you to always calculate and get back the latest and greatest output from those rules and those inferences that you've deployed. And quickly before we get into the demo, just going to talk a little bit more on why and how this can help your organization. According to a commission study, enterprises using Stardog can realize a return on investment of over 320%. They do this through increased productivity, which is from the virtualization and how that eliminates ETL processes. Stardog's UIs and capabilities are easy to implement, and Stardog provides performance-enabled agility and flexibility, again, to continue to grow your knowledge graph and expand out from that first use case. Stardog also helps with reducing infrastructure costs through virtualization. This reduces storage costs, and this also reduces the computational hardware cost. And this all leads to increased profits, by connecting multiple data sources together in a semantic layer. It makes data analysis more efficient. It also allows you to integrate unstructured data and allow this data to be analyzed more easy. And then through Stardog's inference engine, you can generate new insights that may not have been as available or known as before. And again, all of these benefits resulted in a over 300% ROI when using Stardog. So we're about to step into the kind of demo portion of the 4 clicks to a knowledge graph session. I know some of you have been on calls with my colleagues previously where they've demoed various things with the platform. Today, I'm going to start with Stardog's knowledge kits. These are actual Stardog databases that contain combinations of data models, constraints, actual data, queries. And if you're a Databricks customer, you can actually launch Stardog Cloud from their Partner Connect, and it will provide you with some sample databases to get started. And I kind of touched on this, but again, if you've seen one of these previous webinars with Stardog, you'll know that we have 3 UIs. You can join free at cloud.stardog.com and begin using our knowledge kits, our UIs there. So now I'll head over to my browser and get started with the demonstration. And I'll pause there. I do have the chat up on my other screen. So please, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to monitor the chat throughout the presentation. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is our cloud portal. And this is where you would come to kind of start anything Stardog. If you have access to multiple environments, for example, a development, a test, a production environment, you would come here and manage all of your connections. You can add a new connection here. You can get a Stardog Cloud instance by clicking here and joining for free. We also have links to all of our tutorials, our documentation, blogs, and then the knowledge kits that we talked about. Before I get started, I see one question in the chat about pointing to resources within Databricks and how to create the API Stardog. Joe, my colleague, if you're on and can share a link in real time, that would be great. Otherwise, Matthew will have to follow up through the DSC and share that, or if we have time at the end. I just don't have that readily available. But there's definitely documentation and links on our website that do help with that. So as I mentioned, we have a set of knowledge kits. So I'm going to click into here, and you can see here we have everything from a Star Wars knowledge kit to insurance risk and underwriting. And some of these are fun, some of these are industry specific, but the whole goal of these are to help get you started on your knowledge graph journey. I'm going to start with a flight planning use case. So this is a set of data around aviation and flight planning. Excuse me. Aviation is sort of a personal passion of mine, so I like to show this one off. So we're going to begin by creating a knowledge graph. So in one click, I can select my environment, which is a pre-sales environment that I have. On my second click, I can click this database drop down and I'll select the aviation database. And then on my fourth click, I can just install this knowledge graph. And what this is going to do is take the model and the data that's a part of this kit and deploy it to a database in my pre-sales environment called aviation. On each kit page, you can see things like an overview of the data model. So today we're going to be working with things like aerodromes, which is a fancy word for airports. They are related to things like runways, weather reports, preferred routes, which are sort of like the highways in the sky. We have some examples of what the data actually looks like. And then we have examples of what it looks like in our Stardog Explorer UI. And we kind of end that with some sample queries that you can use to get started. And then any of this data that we have here, we have the sources referenced, if you want to take a look at it yourself. So I am, you can see that my kit has now been installed, again, only 4 clicks. And I'm going to now move into my pre-sales environment. You can see here we have 3 UIs. If you've been on one of these webinars or another webinar before, you may have seen them. Our Stardog Studio is our integrated developer environment. This is for things like creating databases, managing access to resources, more focused for your administrators and data engineers. We have our Stardog Designer, which is a no-code, low-code visual environment for modeling and mapping. We'll show that in a moment. But we're going to start in Stardog Explorer, which is our graph search, visualization, and exploration tool. So I'm going to click that. It's going to launch me into a new window. And I will select the aviation database where I just loaded data into. And I come to the Stardog Explorer home screen. There are a couple of options here. I can quickly visualize the model. And you can see here, this should look very similar to the screenshot that was in the starter kit page. We have the aerodromes, runways, preferred routes, etc. I can come back to the home page. I can filter on any individual class. I can search for, I was just in Nashville for a wedding this weekend, actually, and that's the example from the starter kit. So I will search for Nashville. We'll see we get 3 results. So a nav aid, which is like a radio thing supporting commercial aviation. And then we actually have 2 aerodromes, a heliport and an airport here. The other way to search is I can use Stardog's advanced query builder. I can say I want to search for all aerodromes that have an aerodrome name containing Nashville. And when I search that, I get 2 results. So I basically added a filter or a specific query to only look for aerodromes. And then I get a result back of these 2. I'm going to select Nashville International Airport because that's what I flew into. And if you click once, what we call our large card or detail panel pops up on the right. So you can see things here like the identifier or the latitude and longitude. Anything that is not hyperlinked is an attribute on this particular instance of an aerodrome. Anything hyperlinked is a relationship to another instance of data within the graph. I'm pretty sure that if you've been on one of these webinars with Stardog before, you may have seen something like this. But to really understand how Nashville International Airport is related to all of these other entities, I'm going to bring it to the graph view. So you can see here, if I zoom in, we have things. We have our Nashville International Airport at the center. We have observed weather. So if I right click on the weather pattern or the weather instance, I can see the current dew point is 7.2, the altimeter, temperature, all things weather that would be required for planning a commercial flight. We also have links to all the different runways. So we have 4 separate runways at Nashville. Depending on the wind direction, they go bi-directional. So depending what time of day and where the wind is, you might be on, going one direction on the runway or the other. We also have what I was telling you about with the preferred routes. So these are the highways of the sky. So we can look at these. These are, for example, we can pull one of these out. Sorry, one second. There we go. I'll pull one of these out and we can begin to expand by that route. So the origin of this route is Nashville Airport. Well, maybe we want to see what the destination of this route is. And we can see that it is George Bush International Airport, which is in Houston. We could then begin to expand, and maybe we need to understand what the runways are at this destination airport. But really, this is to show you how you can begin to drill through the graph and understand all of the different relationships. Pause there. Any questions in the chat? I don't think I see any at the moment. Okay, very good. So what you've seen now is a starter kit that helps you begin building a knowledge graph around flight planning. So these are things surrounding the airport, like runways, radio frequencies, the highways of the sky, etc. Well, what if you wanted to expand your knowledge graph out into more operational data, so flight information? We're going to use Stardog Designer to add in a new class or classes to our ontology or our model, as well as map in a new data source. So I'm going to start in Stardog Designer. And I'm going to create a new project, and we'll just call this DSC for today. And I will pause real quick. I see some questions in the chat. There's some questions around source connections and things like that. We have an NLP processor that can handle documents and images. We every kind of data. So yes, we can consume JSON data. We have some capabilities to import that. If it's stored in like a MongoDB database, then we can definitely virtualize that. So it really depends on your use case. I'm not sure if we have a tutorial around MongoDB, but we do have. There we go. Joe added a link, but we do have documentation on how to connect, and I think we'll share all of this information after the meeting. So our Stardog Designer basically gives you a blank canvas to start with. So we have already built our knowledge graph around flight planning. We've got a model. And so we can actually bring that model directly from the database into the canvas here, because we want to add some classes around flight planning. So again, I'm in my pre-sales environment, selecting my database and selecting my data model there. You'll see it bring in the classes to let me click back out. There we go. Sometimes it just takes a second to refresh, but you can see here we have the same classes from the example we were just looking at in the starter kit, as well as Stardog Explorer. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. So we've imported this model. The next thing we want to do is add a new class to our model, and we'll call this class. And actually, one thing I want to do real quick is I just want to update what we call the namespace. This is just how we're save that. And so we're going to create a new class, and we'll call this class flights. And I know in our flights data set, we have something like a flight number. You can add that. We have scheduled departure time, and that time is actually a 4-digit string. We have a actual departure time, which is when the flight actually departed. Have a departure date, which in this, I accidentally. So I'm just adding a few properties. I just be patient while I do this. And so we have things like the flight number, the scheduled departure time, the actual departure time, the departure date, and maybe the planned arrival time. So I've added all of these just for strings because of my understanding of the data set. And I'm going to create this, and it's going to drop a new class into the canvas here. And I'm going to actually relate these two classes together now by creating a link. So I can add, here, I'll do it by clicking this button. By this link button up here. We'll call this departs from, and we'll add the target as the aerodrome or the airport. So now conceptually, I have built a new class with a relationship to the aerodrome. I've taken this knowledge graph from just a purely flight planning database and beginning to kind of move it into a more enterprise-wide or more operational type of environment. Now, from here, I'm going to add a new project resource. So I could go and create, if I wanted to create a new virtual graph, I'll just step into this quickly. But this is where you can go to add in things like a Databricks instance or Postgres database or any one of the connectors that we support from a virtualization perspective. But I'm going to go back, and in this case, I'm just going to add a new CSV file from my desktop for now. This is going to bring me to a preview page. I can call this flights, whatever I want. It does give me a preview of the data, so this helps when trying to identify a unique identifier, things like that. And I create this, and it will drop this particular project resource into the canvas that I can then begin mapping to the class that I just created, as well as building this relationship to the aerodrome. So I highlight this project resource, again, add a new link. We'll call this map flights. And I'll just drag this to the flight class. Should snap into place. I can come up here to the mapping tab and select that flight. So I will pick a label. A label is how you want, what text you want displayed for this instance in Stardog Explorer. I'll pick we'll do flight number. And the primary identifier, just for simplicity's sake, we'll make the flight ID, since through that preview, I know that that was unique. Now, I have created these properties a few minutes ago on my class, and I could go through one by one and try to map these up. Instead, I want to use Stardog's suggest mapping feature, and this will recommend what columns from that file should be mapped to the attributes that I created. So with a simple click, it gives me a degree of probability that these line up. So you can see things here like the ACT depart time from the file lines up with my actual departure time property. And I can go through and accept these. You see here, flight date links to departure date, flight number, scheduled departure time. However, I didn't find one for planned arrival time. That's okay. I can come through here and see if I have one, and I do, and we're going to call that scheduled arrival time. Now, the last piece of this is we want to map flights to the aerodrome. Well, we've already defined and populated our aerodrome database through the knowledge kit. So now all we have to do is build the relationship between the two classes. We'll just link flight. We'll call it link flights. Actually, that's not what I want. Sorry, 1 second. Highlighting the project resource, we're going to call this link flights. And it's going to drop another dotted arrow into the canvas that will drag to this relationship right here. It should pop into place. I can then double click on this mapping, and brings this up. So we've already defined the unique identifier of flights, but now we need to tell Stardog what is the primary identifier that we want to use to map to aerodromes or airports. And in this case, we want to use the origin airport because the relationship that we're populating is that it departs from. Now from here, we can either export all of the artifacts that we've just created, the new model, the artifacts that will then be used to map and load data into the graph, or we can publish this data directly to the Stardog server. Again, I'm going to select my pre-sales environment. I'm going to select my specific database, which is aviation. I come through here. I just don't need a copy of the artifacts myself. I am actually going to replace the existing data model. And then I already have data, so I don't want to create new data or replace an existing data set. I just want to append onto the existing data set that I have in the graph. And now I can publish this back to Stardog. It looks like that was successful, which is great. I can come back here. I'm just going to refresh the page from the point of view of where we were at Nashville. You should see all of the same relationships from before, but with the addition of flight information for flights that departed from Nashville. So we have 81 flights that departed Nashville. We could begin to explore any one of these just to show one of them to, we have all the properties that we added. So you have your flight number, departure date, planned scheduled arrival time, all these properties that we just added. And so, from there, you could decide to add on additional flight information around maybe the aircraft that operates it. Maybe you have passenger lists for each flight. But you can imagine how you can continue to explore, expand, and grow the graph over time. I hope this demo today using Stardog Explorer and Stardog Designer helped highlight how you as users can take this kind of power into your own hands and begin building your own knowledge graphs and iterating and creating value for yourselves and for your organizations. So, with that, I'm gonna conclude the demo part of this. I'm here for Q&A. I believe Joe had handled all the questions for me in the chat, but please let me know if I can answer any more. And Joe, I don't know if there's anything that you can add in the chat that I missed, but okay, so I see a question from John about flight data merged from two sources. Very good question. So in the designer portion of the the mapping exercise, you're more than welcome to map one or more sources to the same target class. If you line up that unique identifier, Stardog will automatically recognize those as the same flight. However, if you do not have a unique identifier, which is a common problem, you can build a composite key potentially using Stardog Designer. I didn't show that feature, but you can create that primary key or that primary identifier with one or more fields. You can also use inferencing to do that. So maybe you don't have an identifier, but you build in a logical inference, like if flight date, airline operating it, and the flight number are the same, then you can infer that two flights are the same. So depending on what your kind of goal is with integrating two sets of flight data, there's a number of ways you could harmonize that data or link it together. So there's a question around how you can add reasoning to your model. Well, if depends what type of reasoning. If you're building out an OWL ontology, there's some basic reasoning or OWL axioms that could be added through Stardog Designer. Otherwise, you can add or build out an ontology in one of the open source tools and import that data into Stardog. We also support building out rules on top of Swirl. So that's Stardog's reasoning is actually built on top of Swirl. So you can deploy those through Stardog Studio as well. So you can build out OWL and Swirl and Stardog reasoning in Stardog Studio. And Stardog Designer rules will be coming soon as well. I see a question. What needs to be done to compare delays per airport? Well, we've just showed you how to kind of search and explore the graph. Stardog has a number of ways that end users could then consume this data. We have a REST API. We have a Python package. So if you're a Databricks user or a Python user, you can use a Jupyter notebook or a Databricks notebook to pull that data in and query across all of the data. We have what we call a Sparkle endpoint. You can query using GraphQL. We also have a SQL endpoint, which is where we take that knowledge graph and represent it in a relational form. So you can use tools like Tableau or Power BI to build BI type reports on top of the graph. So I think to answer that question, that's what you would do, right? You would essentially pick one of these ways to access data in the graph and begin to write those queries specific to whatever query or answer you're trying to get. And I think that kind of goes to the second question around aggregating data in bulk and what kind of languages does Stardog support. Again, as I mentioned, we have a Python package that's available to use. So you can use that in any environment, a Jupyter Notebook, Databricks, GraphQL. We have Sparkle querying, SQL querying. And so the SQL endpoint is built on the MySQL protocol, so you're not limited to Power BI or Tableau. Any MySQL or any application that can make a MySQL connection can then take advantage of that endpoint in the graph. And Joe, I see you follow up with the delays. I think that kind of just goes back to using one of these methods to query the graph and accessing the data in a way and aggregating it in a way to calculate those delays per airport. Within Sparkle or within SQL or within Python, all of those programming languages have ways to do aggregations, and we facilitate giving you access to the data to be able to do those types of calculations. And the other thing I would add is, an example might be, if you're not just trying to calculate delays, but you're trying to predict delays, this could be a really good example where you're using Python to extract that data from the graph into like a Databricks notebook. You put it into like a data frame, and then you begin to run more advanced algorithms and analytics against that data. And then you can take that output from those predictive algorithms and write back to the Stardog graph. And now those predicted delays become queryable, in a UI like Explorer here, or any other method, and it becomes a cyclical process. As you train the algorithms, you write back to the graph, and it kind of continues to build on itself. Another question, is Stardog natively available on Azure? So from a deployment perspective, we have a couple options. You can deploy on premise. You can deploy on an Azure, AWS, or Google private cloud. We also have our Stardog Cloud, which is our managed offering. So, I don't know if that means it's natively available on Azure, but Azure VPCs are definitely one of the options for deployment. There's a question around our NLP capabilities. So, the first thing I'll say about NLP is, depending on the industry you're in, it's a very, very challenging problem to solve. So we have what we call our Bytes pipeline. This comes with some NLP capabilities around entity extraction and linking, but we take advantage of open source packages like Stanford's Core NLP library and things like that. So the answer is yes, you can do some basic NLP work. However, our NLP pipeline is set up that you can take advantages of customized NLP work that may have already been done within your organization, and you can plug those extractors and those linkers into the pipeline, and then sort of integrate with the graph. And then I would also add on that, I haven't mentioned this, we do have a kind of a bi-directional Spark connector. So again, working from Spark or Databricks Notebook or anywhere else where it supports Spark, you can query the graph, run graph algorithms like predict, PageRank or similarity or clustering, take those results and write those back to the graph as well. There's a question around Stardog Explorer handling huge terabytes of data. So, that's more about the scale of the platform. Stardog Explorer basically operates each time I expand a node, it makes a query to the database. So I think, if your underlying database contains terabytes of data, then yes, the Stardog Explorer could handle that. I guess it just depends on what type of visualization you're looking for there. But yeah, we could handle those data volumes. It's a question on the free version. There are, depending on if you're using our cloud free version or the downloaded version, there are restrictions around some of the virtual graphs that are available. Things around like integration with Active Directory, high availability, things that would be required to take you to a production environment are not available. But if there's specific questions, Ramon, then, again, we can be more than happy to chat offline after this. Chip says, can the reasoner inferencing engine be used to create new triples using RDF? So as I mentioned, our reasoner by default runs at query time, so you pay for what you use kind of deal. But there's no reason why you couldn't leverage that output to insert data back into the graph and materialize it. So, the answer is yes there. I think, all these questions are, great because they highlight the capabilities of the platform, but that, that it does provide a lot of flexibility to kind of meet you all where you're at with your requirements, your current kind of data ecosystem within the organization. The goal of the platform is to empower as many people within your organization, whether it's an organization of one or an organization of 100,000. We want to empower as many people to take advantage of the knowledge graph. Did I miss any questions? Please bubble it to the top. If I did, I apologize. I'm trying to keep up. I guess I'll end on, maybe going back to our kits page, just for, everyone to capture the URL. You can begin by going to cloud.stardog.com. You can create an account. You can get a free instance. There's limitations around the size of that instance and some other, productionized type things, like I mentioned, but I would love for everyone here to head over, try it out, try the kits out, reach out to me or Joe or anyone if you have questions. I don't know how I do this. I can put my email on the screen. I'll put my email in the chat. That probably makes more sense. Available for a chat. If you have more questions, would like to learn more about the platform, please let me know. Thank you, everyone.
I think there's one more question.
Yeah, I see that. So, Roman, can you maybe explain what you mean by time process fit? Are you talking about like time series temporal data? Maybe just one more line on what you mean there. If you're meaning like temporal data, a graph is, again, a great way to you can model that. Like in the example I gave today around flights, that was actually more of a temporal use case where we're modeling an individual flight. And you can imagine that particular aircraft hiring. Sorry, maybe I'm just not understanding. I mean, I think so. Yeah, like what I was saying is, again, you can model, transactional or operational level data into the graph. I think my example was a simple one, right? That flight instance was really temporal, right? It had a date. It was a point in time, right? Because you had the actual departure time, but then you had the planned arrival time. You can imagine that could be expanded out into other kind of temporal instances of the same flight. That aircraft, running that flight could have multiple of those flights within the same day. And so, I think time process, and at scale and using a graph to do analysis, is a use case and I think Joe's commenting we have, not to be confused, there are two Joes monitoring the call right now from Stardog. So I think Joe's commenting it on the chat as well. And Ramon, I apologize if I didn't answer that question fully, but I think the answer is yes. We can, if you have a specific use case, you mentioned a couple here, we can definitely have a chat about that.